When you hear California Gold Rush, what comes to mind? Probably guys with big beards finding giant gold nuggets and getting rich overnight, right? But what happened after all that easy gold was gone? Well, we're going to dig into the story of one single miner from 1860 to find out what the real price of gold was and where his true fortune was actually hiding. So let's set the scene. It's 1860. The first big frenzy of the gold rush is pretty much over. You know, that easy-to-find gold, the stuff just sitting on the surface that kicked off the whole craze? Yeah, that was long gone. The dream of just picking nuggets out of a stream was just that, a dream. For the thousands of guys still out there, it was a whole new game of incredibly hard work for less and less reward. So you gotta wonder, what did it really take to make it, to just survive in the gold fields a whole decade after the rush started? To figure that out, we're gonna zoom in on the story of one man, a 24-year-old miner named Elijah McKnew, and see what his life was like in the rough and tumble town of Tuolumne, California. And here's the thing about Elijah. Turns out, he wasn't just looking for gold. He was also running from something, a past he really wanted to leave buried. So get this, Elijah had a secret. He wasn't just some guy from Maryland looking for adventure. Nope, he had actually deserted from the U.S. Army a few years before. And check this out. The 1860 census lists him as Elijah Pickrell. He was using his middle name as his last name, probably to fly under the radar. For a guy like him, California wasn't just about getting rich. It was a chance to completely start over, where nobody knew your name. And this is the perfect way to look at the world he stepped into. The myth was all about easy money, but the reality for Elijah in Tuolumne County, it was absolutely grueling. He was mining in what historians call a transitional period, which basically means the lone miner was on his way out, and big companies were moving in. Every single speck of gold had to be earned with back-breaking labor. Okay, so what does back-breaking labor actually look like? What was a typical day for a guy like Elijah back in 1860? Let's walk through it. Yeah, forget your typical 9 to 5. This was a 12-hour slog, from the second the sun came up until it went down. The day always started with the most important job, finding pay dirt. That's the gravel that just might, have some gold in it. After that, it was just a brutal, relentless cycle of digging, hauling heavy buckets of rock and water, and then washing it all, just hoping for a little glimmer of gold at the very end. Now, you might think finding that pay dirt was all about luck, but not really. It was actually a science. Experienced guys like Elijah, they learned to read the land. They knew that gold is super heavy, so it settles in predictable spots, these little natural traps, like the inside of a river bend or behind a big rock. It took real skill and a sharp eye for how the world worked. The work was just brutal, but the miners had tools. And when you think about it, these tools were basically vessels for all their hopes and dreams. So let's take a look at the actual tech they were using. Elijah was what's known as a placer miner. And the whole idea behind placer mining is actually pretty simple. It's all about using water and gravity. Your goal is to wash away all the light stuff, the sand, the dirt, the gravel, and hope that some of that much heavier gold is left sitting at the bottom. Okay, first up, the one everybody knows, the classic gold pan. It's great for checking a new spot, but man, is it slow. A really skilled miner could maybe wash 50 pans in a full 12-hour day. Just think about that. By 1860, trying to make a living with just a pan was almost impossible. Way too much work for way too little gold. So the next step up was the rocker box, sometimes called a cradle. And this was a huge improvement in efficiency. You could process way more dirt, but the labor involved was intense. You're shoveling gravel in, you're constantly pouring water over the top with a dipper, and you're rocking the whole machine back and forth for hours. It was an exhausting, repetitive motion that would kill your arms and your back. All right, now we're leveling up to the long tom. This was even better than a rocker, because it used a steady flow of water from the river, so you didn't have to rock it. But, and it's a big but, you needed two things, a good source of running water and a team. You couldn't run this alone. You needed one guy shoveling, another clearing out rocks. The whole idea of the lone prospector was really starting to disappear. So, we've seen the work, we've seen the tools, but what was the real cost of this life? It wasn't just paid in sweat, let me tell you. It was paid in broken bodies and deep loneliness. I mean, just try to picture this. Standing knee-deep in ice-cold mountain water all day, every single day. These guys had constant back problems, arthritis, hands that were just raw and bleeding from the cold and the rough tools. And on top of all that physical pain was the mental grind, the sheer monotony of it all, and that constant nagging question in the back of your head, will I find anything today? And for all that suffering, what was the big payoff? Well, in that 1860 census, Elijah McKnew's personal property was valued at $200. Let that sink in. $200. He wasn't rich. He wasn't even close. For him, $200 meant he was surviving. And that was the reality for almost every miner left in California at that point. And when the workday was finally over, it's not like life got any easier. The camps were rough, isolated places. We're talking about men living in crude little cabins or tents, totally cut off from family. After a day's work, the only things to do were play cards, drink, and maybe tell some stories. It was a world away from anything you'd call civilized.
But here's where the story takes a turn. Elijah's story doesn't end with him being broken and alone in a cold creek. Because while he never found a fortune in gold, he was about to find something way, way more valuable.
Just look at this timeline. It shows everything. In 1860, he's a miner. But just 5 years later, he gets married to a local girl, Jane Whittle. And by 1868, he's not a miner anymore. His occupation, farmer. He traded the uncertainty of the gold pan for the stability of a plow and a family. And here is my favorite little detail from this whole story. In that same 1860 census, the one that lists Elijah the miner, his future wife, Jane, is listed just 2 lines below him. Isn't that wild? He was a 24-year-old guy with a secret past. She was a 13-year-old girl. Just 2 names on a list, neighbors on paper, who had no idea they would one day build a whole life together. So, no, Elijah never struck it rich. He never found that massive gold nugget. But think about what he did walk away with. He got a masterclass in perseverance. He developed a work ethic that was second to none. He found his freedom, his independence. And in that wild, rough country, he found the woman who would help him build a family. That was his treasure. And that really makes you think, doesn't it? Elijah's story kind of flips the whole legend of the gold rush on its head. It makes you look past all the stories of instant riches and ask what a real fortune looks like. What if, for thousands of guys like Elijah who broke their backs in the dirt, the real gold was never in the ground to begin with?